Welcome to this painting tutorial. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this video. In this video I will be painting a Drukhari or Dark Eldar Succubus. I'm working on painting a witch cult battalion for my Drukhari army, and this is one of the centerpieces. And because of that I went an extra limb on painting the face, and it's a fairly lengthy video. But I'm happy with the way it turned out. You can use this guy to paint your witches and other similar Drukhari such as Reavers or Hellions. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like it, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe and all that good stuff. And that's it, let's begin. I'm going to start by priming the model in black. This is a good start because most of the model is very dark other than the face and skin. And for that I'm going to use Surface Primer Black through an airbrush. You can use any other primer you like. You can use a rattle can primer if you want, but I would recommend using black. I decided to start by laying out the color for the armor. For that I'm going to use Kantor blue. Remember to thin it down a little bit. You're going to need at least 2 coats, but I think I went with 3 just to make sure it covers well. As long as you use thin paint, you won't lose any detail. And I try to use a medium brush, number 2 watercolor brush, and just paint all these areas very carefully. Once that's done, I'm going to start laying down the silver with the Leadbelcher, and with this I'm going to use a fine detail brush and start picking all of the areas that are going to be silver around the body, and a medium brush to paint the weapons, because generally those areas are bigger. We are trying just not to paint on the areas that are going to be black, because those are black already. If we make a mistake, I can go back with the primer that I used through a brush. If you don't, you're going to need to paint all of the black areas with your preferred black paint, because if you don't, it might have a different finish. But because I use the same one through an airbrush, I can use the same just color that I used through an airbrush to clean up the suit. Next I'm going to use Rakarth flesh, and with this color I'm going to paint the skin, being careful to thin it down properly, because these colors that are, especially the ones that are very light, they tend to create paint strokes and go in unevenly. So thin it down a little bit more than usual so that it goes on well. It's gonna look patchy, but then you can wait for it to dry and give it a second coat, and if that doesn't cover, give it a third coat. I think I did 3 coats. And just be careful not to cover too much detail, and that you go over all of the skin areas. You don't have to follow the exact order that I did. You can mix them up and start with the skin if you want. But this is the way I decided to do it. Next, I'm going to start painting the hair and every detail that I want to be red with Mephiston red. Just be careful not to paint on the areas that you painted before, but it's the same procedure. Water it down a little bit so that it flows evenly onto the surface, and use at least 2 or 3 coats depending on how well it's covering. Let every coat dry in between coats before you apply another one. If the coat hasn't dried properly and you start painting over it, you're gonna tear that layer and you're gonna create brush marks and crumbs of paint and essentially parts from that little piece of layer film that was drying. Once it's done, I'm going to use Sandry Dust, and with this color I'm going to paint all of the bone areas around the model, and I'm also going to paint the underside of the little cape that this witch is carrying around. Essentially, the cape you can paint it the color you want. I've seen them painted in gray and bluish gray or whatever you want, but because the armor is blue and I wanted to break it up, I decided to go with brown instead. So I went with this Sandry Dust. Once that's done, I'm going to use Rhinox hide, and with this color I'm going to paint the hair on the skull that is pinned into the blade that is going through the back, and I'm also going to paint the cape's fur. The same way that we're painting all of the other parts, just make sure to thin it down and don't paint over other areas that you've finished painting already. If you do, it's not a big deal. You can clean them up with the color that it was supposed to be where you painted. But that's it, just be careful. Next, I'm going to use Screamer Pink, and with this color I'm going to paint the little piece of cloth that is hanging from the waist. You can paint this one whatever color you like. I usually paint these on like a flayed skin color, but I decided to go with pink, like a purplish pink for this one. Next, I'm going to use Balthasar Gold, and with this color I'm going to finish up all of the base coats. This is going to go over all of the areas that are going to be gold or brass. This includes the blast pistol tip and all of the little ornaments around the armor and weapons. And with that, we're going to finish up base coating all of the areas, and we're going to move on to the washes. Once we have all of the places covered with paint, I'm going to start washing the skin. For that, I'm going to use about 1-to-1 mix of Reikland Flesh Shade and Lamian Medium. This is because I don't want the Flesh Shade to overwhelm the skin, because we want a fairer looking skin, and I don't want it to turn completely brown or completely like sepia tone. So I'm going to water it down a little bit, and I'm going to use this all over the skin. Just make sure it gets into the recesses. Don't apply that much, just a little bit. And it's going to be fairly strong, but it's going to be less stronger than if we used the wash straight from the pot. Next, with Nuln oil, I'm going to wash all of the recesses on the blue. I'm going to wash all of the silver. On places like the glaive, I'm only going to paint the recesses as well. I don't want to paint the whole thing because I'm going to have to clean it up later. So I'm just painting the recesses on most of the metallic areas. On metallic areas that are small, you can just shade the whole thing. You're going to highlight it on a later step anyway. And finally, I'm going to use Agrax Earthshade, and with this color I'm going to shade most of the other areas. I'm going to completely shade the hair, the little piece of cloth that is hanging around the waist, and the fur and the bone, and basically all of the rest of the areas that we didn't shade, I'm going to shade with this color. Once you're done, you can leave the model like this. This is a good tabletop standard, but next I'm going to do the most difficult part, which is painting the face. And for that, I'm going to start with black. You can use any black you like. I'm going to paint the complete eye socket, including a little bit of the edges that touch the skin, and I'm going to paint the inside of the mouth with this color. This is going to be difficult. If you don't want to paint the face because it's hard, don't do it. The model's going to look fine. You're not going to be able to see the face from 3 feet away, so just if you want to go the extra mile and paint the face so that it looks cool like this, you can try, and it's hard. It's going to take a while to get the hang of it. It's not easy for me, but I happen to do a good job this time. When this step is done, the model should look like this. If you mess up, you can clean up with Rakarth flesh, but you can see I painted the eyebrows and the inside of the mouth and the complete eyes. Next, I'm going to start painting the eyes. I'm going to use Palid Witch Flesh, and this is going to be a little bit hard. You need to have a very fine tip. You need to twist the brush in the palette and have a very little paint on the very tip, and just paint a little dot on the far side of each side of the eyes to basically create a pupil in the middle. Just touch one of the edges of the almond shape of the eye and then touch the other one, and this is going to create the eye pretty much. You have to be very careful, and it's not easy. I happened to get it the first time, but it's gonna take some practice to get it right. This is the way the model should look after doing that. You can see I painted just a little dot on either side of the eye to create the eyes. And on the face, I just painted a little line on the teeth on the top and bottom, and this is how it looks. Once it's done, very carefully, I'm going to paint the lips, and for that I'm going to mix Rakarth Flesh with Screamer Pink. You don't want to use Screamer Pink straight on because it's going to be super highly saturated. It's going to look weird. So you need to tone down all of the colors that you're going to use as like makeup, so that they resemble the colors of the skin. And so it's about 1-to-1, a little bit more Rakarth Flesh than pink, so it doesn't overwhelm the face. And this is just going to go over the lower lip and a little bit around the edge of the mouth. And just be very careful not to paint on the areas that you work so hard to paint already, and just do it very carefully. And then because the armor is blue, I decided to go with a little bit of blue makeup on the eyeshadow. And for that, I mixed up Palid Witch flesh, because the flesh on the skin is going to be a lot paler. And I mixed it up with Tunderhawk blue about the same rate. A little bit more Palid Witch flesh than blue, so that it doesn't overpower. And I'm going to just very carefully paint in between the eyebrow and the eye, and that's going to make the makeup effect. Once that's done, I'm going to start highlighting the skin. For that, I'm going to use straight Palid Witch flesh and just thin it down a little bit more than normal. And you can apply a little bit of patchy coats until you get the desired opacity. Don't go straight with a thick layer of paint, because this paint tends to make clumps and look bad if you apply it very thick. So just go very carefully, start painting highlighting all of the areas, just leaving the very recesses on the previous color. And this is going to look very pale, but this is how the model looks on the artwork, and I wanted to go a little bit like that, and that's it. This is how the model should look after all of these steps. At the end, I decided to go an extra highlight on the skin, but I'm not going to show it here. I'm going to show it at the end. It's just a little edge highlight with white on the very sharpest edges of the skin, and I'm going to show it at the end because for now I thought that I was going to leave it like this, but then I decided to highlight it a little bit further. Next, I'm going to use Dark Reaper, and with this color I'm going to edge highlight all of the edges, or the places that reflect light on the black suit. And this is just going to be using a fine detail brush, and try to just make it the finest line you can do on these edges. And from here on, the tutorial turns a little bit easier compared to the difficulty of the face. This is going to be just going downhill and finishing up the rest of the colors. Once you have the face and you're happy with that, the rest of the tutorial is easy. It's just a bunch of edge highlighting and highlighting. Once that's done, I'm going to give a second extreme highlight to these areas with Dawnstone. And with this color, I'm just going to pick the sharpest edges, or the places I feel reflect the most light that are inside the previous highlight that we did. Try not to go overboard, but if you do it right and you do this highlight a little thinner than the previous one, it's going to look like a color transition that is going to make the blacks pop a lot. I don't, for tabletop, for my regular witches, I don't highlight black, because from afar it's not going to show up that much. And if your model is not a centerpiece, I just don't highlight blacks. I decide to give and take some of the painting, just highlight the most prominent parts and the most eye-catching areas. Next, I'm going to highlight the armor with Thunderhawk blue. And with this color, I'm going to pick up all of the edges of the blue armor, the same way as we did with the black. And don't be afraid to go a little bit thick. My highlights are usually a little bit thick, because if you do it too thin, from far away they're not going to be noticed. So you want them to pop a little bit more than usual. And I think that's fine. Some people don't like it. I like it that way. And it allows me to paint a little bit faster, because I don't have to be as neat with these edges. But I think they look pretty good. You can change it up if you want. And that's it. Next, with Fenrisian Gray, I'm going to give an extreme highlight to the armor. This is going to make it really pop. You want this color to be a lot thinner on the edges, so do a thinner edge highlight on the very sharpest edges and places that are like very pointy of the armor, which there are a lot. But if you do it right, it's going to look like a very sharp edge, and it's going to look very bright, and it's going to make the armor pop. Once that's done, I'm going to start highlighting the brown. For that, I'm going to use Scrag brown, and you could dry brush it on the fur if you want. And I'm also going to use it on the hair, on the skull, just to not do everything else black, just to make it different from the suit. And here you need to be very careful if you're gonna do it like me and paint each individual hair strand, both on the skull and on the fur. If you want, you could dry brush it, and I would recommend if you're going to dry brush it, do it before all of the other highlighting so you don't dry brush where you don't need to and accidentally ruin something that you've already painted. Once it's done, I'm going to give a second highlight to these areas with Deathclaw brown, and with this color I'm going to color in about half of the previous area. And on the fur, I'm going to highlight the half bottom part of the fur, just leaving the very top parts on the previous color. And this is going to create an illusion of a transition of color. And I prefer doing this manually and not dry brush it, because it's going to pop a lot more, especially on the fur. It's a lot more work. It takes a little bit more time, but I think it's worth it, and I like doing it that way. If it was a less important model, I would probably just dry brush it, but yeah. And to finish up this brown areas, I'm going to use Ushabti bone, and with this color I'm going to just paint the very tips of the hair and the very bottom parts of the fur coat. Just 2 or 3 layers of hair strands or hair like bunches. I'm going to highlight with this color, and this is going to make it pop a lot more. It's gonna look like bear fur or something like that, and it's gonna look pretty good. Just be careful. Again, you can dry brush these colors, and that's it. Also, since we're here, we can use this Ushabti bone to start highlighting the back of the cape, the underside of the cape, and all of the bone areas, just leaving a little bit of the previous color behind on the recesses. And yeah, that's it. And to finish up the bone areas, I'm going to use Screaming Skull, and with this color I'm going to do a very fine edge highlight on the very sharpest parts of the bone areas, on the most prominent parts, and just leave it like that. And that's pretty much both the fur and the bone done. Once it's done, I'm going to move on to use the Screamer Pink again, and I'm going to clean up the cloth around the waist, and this is just because I wanted to make it look a little bit cleaner, and the Agrax Earthshade gave it a very matte, dirtier look. I want the wash only on the recesses, so I'm going to clean up the rest of these areas with Screamer Pink again. Once it's done, I'm going to use Pink Horror, and with this color I'm going to highlight all of the edges of this cloth. And this is just pretty much like we've done on the other areas, just with Pink Horror, and just do all of the edges on this part. Once it's done, I'm going to give it a second highlight with Emperor's Children, and this is just an extreme highlight on the very edges, on the very sharpest edges, and this is going to make it pop even more. After that, I'm going to start highlighting the hair. And with this, I'm going to use Evil Sunz Scarlet and a fine detail brush, and I'm going to paint most of the hair individually, and I'm going to just be careful to leave the recesses alone. I'm going to start to try to paint the hair in the direction that the hair is going, and trying to leave little marks of the hair shadow. And if you overpaint a little bit of some areas, that's fine, but for the most part, try to leave the recesses on the Agrax Earthshade color. And if you do this like motions of the hair as it's going, you're going to leave some of the area on the previous color, and it's going to look like hair. It's going to look pretty good. Once it's done, I'm going to give this areas another highlight with Wild Rider Red, and this is going to go over the areas that reflect the most light. This is going to be on the very top of the what do you call it, a bun on the top of the head, and on the places that most reflect light on the hair that is flowing back, I'm going to use it on the very top part of the curves of the hair and on the tips where it ends, and that's it. Next, I'm going to go back to use Leadbelcher, and with this color I'm going to clean up the blade and big places of silver if you painted them with other colors, or you washed them where you didn't want to, just to make them look neat. You can go back and use Leadbelcher and clean these areas up again. After that's done, I'm going to use Stormhost Silver, and with this color I'm going to edge highlight all of the edges on the silver. I don't pay that much attention to silvers. Other than that, I'm just going to give it a coat, a wash, and an edge highlight with this color, and it looks pretty good. And that's it. And to finish up the brass areas, I'm going to use bright bronze from Game Color. This is one of my favorite colors. You can use Liberator Gold if you want from the Citadel range. But I like the way this color shines a lot more. And it's going to be just an edge highlight on all of the brass or bronze areas around the model. And this is going to make them pop a lot more. And to finish it up, I'm going to use a little bit of blood for the Blood God because it looks cool and it makes it look a little bit more cinematic and dynamic. I'm going to paint some blood on the tip of the blade, just in the direction that it swings. Make some brush strokes to like paint some blood on it. And once it's dry, you can just use a little bit thicker paint on the very edge just to make a little bit of blood build up on the very tip of the sharp edge of the blade. Once that was done, I was finishing up the base. I wanted to give an extra highlight on the skin that I talked about earlier, and just very carefully use a little fine detail brush and just paint the very tip of the nose, the edge of the eyebrow on the top, and the ears, and every little sharp edge if you find any on the skin, on the rest of the skin. And that's it. And this is the finished model. I have to say I had a lot of fun painting this model, and I went a little bit overboard and paid attention to all of the colors on this model. Usually if you're doing witches, you don't want to go in as much detail on all of the areas. When I paint my witches, I pay special attention to the armor, the hair, and the skin, because those are the most prominent parts. You can paint those areas fully, and the rest of the areas you don't have to really highlight them if you don't want to. But yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video and you find it informative and helpful. And if you did, please like the video, comment on it, and subscribe to the channel to help me out and help this channel grow and keep the videos coming. That really inspires me to continue on and do more videos, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next video. You stayed. Great. Thank you very much for supporting my channel, and if you would like to become a patron, there is a link to my Patreon page in the description below. Your contributions help pay for my work and keeps the channel going. A single $1 a month is more than enough, and you can cancel at any time. If you can't, don't worry, you can support my channel by simply watching my videos and sharing them with your friends. Thank you for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.